Well, good morning. The Canada West Foundation is very pleased to release today a policy brief that we've entitled At the Intersection, the Case for Sustained and Strategic Infrastructure Investment. With this brief, for the first time, Canadians and their governments are presented with 30 years of economic research into the vital connection between public infrastructure and the economy. The brief examines 235 studies, rigorous academic and scholarly studies conducted by leading economists and published by the world's most prestigious think tanks, universities, academic journals, and international development agencies. Based on our review of these studies, it's clear that infrastructure, when it is sustained and strategic, boosts productivity and is thus essential to long-term economic growth, fundamental to quality of life, and vital to sustaining social programs and priorities that Canadians value. As such, Canada's governments should not hesitate to maintain a high level of investment in the nation's public infrastructure. This morning, I'd like to comment on that conclusion by outlining the findings in our report, speak on their relevance to Canadians, and then conclude with 5 recommendations. This work started with a very basic question. What is the connection between infrastructure investment and long-term economic growth? As we rolled our sleeves up on this, it soon became apparent that the answer is wrapped up in the relationship between public infrastructure on one hand and productivity on the other. 3 questions have dominated the research into this area. First, is there a relationship between infrastructure investment and productivity? The answer is yes, unequivocally yes. There is virtual unanimity among the studies we reviewed that infrastructure investment is related to productivity and therefore to long-term economic growth. We all know that infrastructure investment helps shore up an economy during times of recession. This has been a key feature of Canada's economic recovery plan and its good public policy. However, our review shows that the most important benefits from infrastructure come from what it accomplishes in the economy across the long haul. And this highlights the need for sustained investment rather than short-term, sporadic bursts prompted by recession. Second, in what direction does this relationship run? In other words, does infrastructure drive productivity, or does productivity and growth drive demand for infrastructure? And there has been significant debate over the years on this question. But today that debate is largely settled, and the answer comes in the form of a strong consensus that infrastructure investment drives productivity by, for example, increasing the return to private investment, which levers additional private investment and the productivity gains that follow in its wake. Recently, Canadian businesses have been urged to invest more to spur economic growth. With infrastructure, governments have at their disposal a tool that they can use to actually encourage private investment. Third, how strong is the impact? Well, it depends. We know that infrastructure investment boosts productivity, but the strength of the impact varies. It depends on the type of infrastructure in view, the location of the build, the condition and state of existing infrastructure, and other factors. Thus, the economic benefits of infrastructure are not automatic. It's important that investments be strategic. Canada needs to be investing not only the right amount in infrastructure, but investing in the right infrastructure, in the right places, in the right way, doing the right things. These findings are highly relevant for Canadians. Productivity is the single most important determinant of long-term economic growth. But we do not fare well when it comes to productivity. I would just draw your attention to a series of slides on the screens. Labor productivity in Canada is lower than many of our international competitors. Labor productivity growth is slower than our international competitors. Among the G7, Canada records relatively slow growth in total factor productivity. And Canada records low levels of growth in infrastructure investment. In the 1960s, we invested 5% of GDP in infrastructure. That fell to about 2% by 2000. Since then, investment has moved back up to 3.5%. The research we have conducted tells us two things on all of this. One, the recent rise in infrastructure investment is encouraging, but if it amounts to simply a short-term blip, it's not likely to have lasting long-term impact. Number two, we now know that government investment in public infrastructure is part of the solution to the productivity challenge. Our brief concludes with 5 recommendations. First, sustained and strategic investments in infrastructure should continue. The time for a program of critical productivity and economy-enhancing investment is now. Our existing systems are aging, so there is obvious need. Macroeconomic conditions are favorable. Interest rates are at some of the lowest levels we've seen in the last 50 years, and the Canadian dollar is strong, which lowers costs for necessary U.S. inputs. And I would just add that the combination of low interest rates and a strong Canadian dollar is somewhat a rarity in the Canadian experience. We should be taking advantage of that. And it's also about the future. Investments today help us take full advantage of high-growth economies such as Asia tomorrow. Second, to be strategic, priority should be given to investments that enhance economic performance. Third, to be strategic, governments should encourage innovation in the design and financing of infrastructure. Fourth, to be strategic, governments should not focus exclusively on new builds, but pay due consideration to renewing existing infrastructure. Finally, to be strategic, ongoing analysis and evaluation of past investments should be conducted and the lessons applied to future investments. This helps government to be selective and strategic and will help result in projects with the greatest potential for the highest economic return.
Thank you. Good morning. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Je m'appelle Jim Watson. Je suis le maire de la ville d'Ottawa, and I'm here on behalf of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Big City Mayors Caucus, and joined by my colleague from City Council, Tim Tierney, who's on the board of directors of the FCM. Today's report is an important one for the municipal sector because it reinforces what we've been saying for quite some time. Predictable, sustainable infrastructure investment over the long term will not only benefit the residents of our cities and communities, but will also improve Canada's economy and create jobs. Municipalities have been working with the federal government to develop a plan that will work for all communities in Canada. We have stated clearly and strongly that we are ready to match, dollar for dollar, any new federal investments. Nous avons dit clairement que nous étions prêts et disposés à investir $1 pour chaque nouveau dollar investi par le gouvernement fédéral à ce chapitre. I will speak on behalf of all Canadian mayors when I say that stronger municipal infrastructure will lead to a stronger economy and a stronger Canada. For example, like its counterparts in other cities, the City of Ottawa is doing as much as it can. We're resurfacing roads, building light rail, constructing new bridges, and opening new recreation centers. Investments like these enhance the quality of life for all the residents. It makes the city a great place to raise a family as well as start and grow a business. But there's more to do, and clearly we cannot do it on our own. We know that cities right across our country are facing infrastructure challenges. Falling bridges, sinkholes, and water main breaks have become all too common on the nightly news. Nous connaissons toute l'ampleur des défis auxquels notre pays est confronté en matière d'infrastructure. Les ponts qui tombent, les nids de poules et les conduits d'eau qui se brisent font trop souvent la manchette des bulletins télévisés. What does it say to Canadians when we can't maintain our basic infrastructure? What does it say to the world, and what does it say to potential investors who want to come to Canada? Municipalities are weighing their infrastructure needs against the financial realities. And as you look at this balance, it becomes very apparent and very clear we can't do it on our own. These infrastructure challenges cannot be fixed unless governments know what to expect, not just in the next budget, but several budgets down the line. We need to be able to plan for the long term. We need a new plan that will ensure predictable source of investment for all municipalities in all parts of Canada. Nous avons besoin de nouveaux plans qui assurent une source de financement prévisible à toutes les municipalités. Predictability will bring confidence, certainty that we can bridge the gap between today's infrastructure problems and tomorrow's productivity success. We need to hear that in the long term plan, application-based spending will become the exception and not the rule. That means a plan that makes the best possible use of tax dollars, which cuts red tape and allows municipalities to plan according to their real priorities and not in the hope of winning the infrastructure lottery. We've all seen what happens in cities like Montreal when infrastructure fails. When an 88-year-old water main burst onto city streets, portions of the city were shut down, hurting the economy and local residents. Or right here in Ottawa this past September when a sinkhole on a major East End artery left residents facing gridlock and long commutes. These are the types of problems that all three levels of government and the private sector need to work on together. C'est là le gendre du problème que les trois paliers du gouvernement et le secteur privé doivent chercher et régler ensemble. Before the next federal budget, municipalities need to know that the federal government plans to allocate funding under its long-term infrastructure plan. This is now the critical question. We need to develop a strong, sound infrastructure plan that will benefit generations of Canadians to come. Merci. Warren.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. On behalf of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and our 420 affiliate chambers across the country, I want to congratulate the Canada West Foundation for doing this report. We're very, very pleased to be associated with it. I think the paper makes a very powerful argument for continuing an investment in public infrastructure. It's also very well written, very accessible, and I think it'll have a big impact. At the Chamber, we've been getting more and more interested in the infrastructure issue in the last few years. Last year, some of you will know, we prepared the first of an annual report called the Top 10 Barriers to Competitiveness in the Canadian Economy, and we'll be releasing our next version of it next week. And we listed the challenge of public infrastructure as one of the 10 big items last year. I don't think I'm giving away any secrets when I say we'll list it again this year in our document, and we'll move it up in priority. So how does public spending on things like sewers and electrical grids deserve to be considered a key barrier to business competitiveness? Firstly, I think because not all political leaders are like Mayor Watson. In Canada today, a lot of politicians and public officials find themselves playing a game of musical chairs. They're deferring maintenance and replacement, and they're just hoping they're not on the job when the music stops and something goes bang. Nobody thanks you for ripping up their street so you can bury $1 million worth of public works 20 feet under the surface. So across Canada, we see a growing backlog of work as provinces and municipalities go a few more years over the projected life of their water or power or transportation assets. And yet, every single business in the country relies on those basic services, and when they break down, as the Mayor mentioned, business losses become very substantial very fast, and they're much larger than the cost of actually running the maintenance. That's why we believe that mayors like Jim Watson and others need and deserve support when they commit money to gritty and boring projects like water mains instead of other more politically attractive projects. Infrastructure has no constituency. Healthcare, pensions, police services, they all have very active lobbies. Nobody loves a sewer pipe. The second reason we focus on infrastructure is just because of the enormity of the expenditures.